Here on Daf Tzadi, and we're going to start with Toshma, which is on the top line. And by way of introduction, if a Kohen receives Truma and somebody else eats it, he has to pay the Kohen a Keren and a Chomish. And he's got to give a shear of Truma that would replace the Truma that he ate. And this is derived in Vayikra Chav Beis, V'ish ki yochal kodesh bishkagav yosaf chamishoso olav. And then the Torah adds the words v'nasan la kohen es hakodesh. And Chazal derived from those extra words that you have to give the Kohen a davar haroi lios kodesh, which means peros chulin. And those peros are returned to the Kohen and they become truma. There's machlokes tanoim as to whether or not they become truma from the moment of hafrasha or only from the moment that it's given over to the Kohen. And now the Gemara is going to quote another brisa to prove that yesh koch v'yad chachamim lakar davar min haTorah toshma. On the second line, down on Daf Tzadi Amud Aleph. Now we're talking about a case of someone who accidentally ate peros of truma. And that's called the shogeg adam. Sha'achal truma tmeya. So in this case, he ate truma tmeya. Now keep in mind that from the Kohen's perspective, there's not much that he can do with truma tmeya. He's got to burn it. He can use it as fuel and heat up his food on top of this fire, but there's not much he can benefit from. It doesn't really have that much of a value to him. Mishalim chulin tahor. So in this case, the Kohen actually benefits because if you give chulin tahorin to the Kohen to replace the chulin, the truma of tmeya, then he gets an upgrade. Now he has chulin tahorin, and they'll become truma, but they'll be truma tahora, which means he can eat them. However, in this case, shilem chulin tmeim. He paid with chulin tmeim. So once again, chulin tmeim on muter ba'anoah. But when they become truma, then it's truma tmeim, and there's not much that he could do with it. Sumchas omer mishum Rabbi Meir. If he pays with peros tmeim b'shogeg, and here the word b'shogeg means one of two things. Either he thought he was paying with peros tahorim, he didn't realize they were tmeim, or he thought that he could pay back with peros tmeim. Is tashlumav tashlumin. Everything is fine with the eved, post facto, and his payment fulfills his obligation. He does not have to replace it again with chulin tahorim. And of course, these peros tmeim become truma. But what about a case of Masechet? He knew very well that these were peros tmeim. He knew very well that he's not fulfilling his obligation of v'nasan lakohen es hakodesh davar haroi lios kodesh by giving peros tmeim. Now he's worthy of a knas, and therefore ein tashlumav tashlumin. In other words, he's going to have to replace these peros, and he's going to have to pay peros tahorim. Chachamim omrim, so that was sumchus in the name of Rabbi Meir. Chachamim, however, say echad zeh v'echad zeh, whether it was shogeg or Masechet, tashlumav tashlumin. He is in fulfillment of his obligation. He has paid back, but yet that's only as far as what he paid. He paid and he transferred it over to the Kohen. It becomes truma in the hands of Kohen as a replacement for the truma that he ate. But nevertheless, the choser u'mishalem chulin tahorim, since he paid up with chulin tmeim, therefore he has not really fulfilled his obligation to compensate the Kohen, and we don't know exactly why. The Gemara is going to try to analyze that. And hence he has to replace the chulin tmeim with chulin tahorin, but tashlum of tashlumin. In other words, that which he gave to the Kohen, that remains in the hands of the Kohen. So the Gemara now raises the following kash on the brisa. This havin on bay. When we study this brisa, we ask the following question: if he pays peiros tmuim b'mezid, so what happens to the Kohen? He receives peiros tmeim. So what? Why does he deserve a penalty for that? And ein tashlum of tashlumin, and he hasn't yet fulfilled his obligation. Adarab, the Gemara says punkvaker tavol bracha. In essence, the Kohen is getting that which supersedes the value of that which he lost. Why? The achal minei midi lo chazile b'tuma for komishalim midi the chazile b'tuma b'yimei tumasa. What was eaten from the Kohen, what peiros tmeim of truma, and that's not roy l'chila. So let's put it at a value of 10, right? Komishalim, now he's getting peiros tmeim of chulin, which has a value of 20 because kachazile b'mei tumasa. He's allowed to eat it during his days of tumah. So truma tmei is always prohibited, even if the Kohen is tamei, and it requires sreifa. That's the end of the story. But chulin tmeim could be eaten by anyone who's tamei, and the Kohen is going to be able to eat it bitumasa. And this would seem to support that opinion that it's not truma from the time of the Ma'aseh Hafrasha, but from the time of the Nesina of the Kohen. And when the Kohen receives this, since he's going to he's going to get a replacement for it, he wants to keep it as it is, as chulin. Now, in the footnote here, he points out the af shal chulin sheshilem chal din truma, whether it's when it was mafresh or maybe when he received it, there's a chalos imkein truvein ru'im lekohen midin truma tmeya. What does Gemara mean? Kachazile b'mei tumaso. It's truma tmeya. Rashi says mikomakom kevan shebeshasha shilem. At the moment that he actually transferred over these chulin tmeim over to the Kohen, savra ylashalem tashlumim ulim, he was giving the Kohen that which is worth more than what the Kohen has. And his impression was he's certainly giving the Kohen something that the Kohen could eat, is there for Tovul HaBracha. So the Tovul HaBracha here in this Gemara is only because of his good intention, not because before the Kohen is going to benefit by eating these chulin tmeim, because these chulin tmeim now, with the nesina to the Kohen, become truma, and truma tmeim is also. There are other Rishonim who have a different approach to this. In any event, the Gemara answers the following: the Amar Rava, the Amile Kidi, Kidi means some anonymous Amora, Chisuri Mechzer V'Alki Ketana. We have to rewrite the brisa. There are pieces in the brisa that were omitted, and we should read it to this: a person sha'achal, he ate b'shogeg truma tmeya, is then mishalim koldahu. He can give any amount, the minimum amount, whatever he wants to pay, he pays, because it's worthless for the Kohen. He can even give him peiros chulin that it's tmeya, and that's in the case of shogeg, where mimanavshach, either as compensation, he is compensating the Kohen, and as far as a knas is concerned, he's not worthy of a knas because he was a shogeg. But ochal, truma tahora, now we have a compensation issue because the Kohen had in his possession truma tahora, which he could eat. It has the full value of truma, and now he's giving in compensation truma tmeya or chulin tmeya. Is therefore mishalem chulin tahora. He must pay chulin tahora. But what happens if he didn't do so? Shilem, in other words, he went ahead and he was over this din, not deliberately, and he paid chulin tmeim. So now the Kohen lost truma tahora. Now he's getting in replace chulin tmeim. Sumchas amishum Rabbi Meir. B'shogeg, if he paid payers tmeim unbeknown to himself, that's called shogeg. Then tashlum of tashlumin, he's finished. He has fulfilled his obligation. And the strange thing here is that what exactly is he compensating the Kohen in a fair sort of way, because he ate Truma Tmeya and now he's giving Chulin Tmeim. And although he did it b'shogeg, and Sumcha says in the name of Meir that Tashlum of Tashlumin, but why? Where's the compensation? And this Gemara L'chora would seem to support an opinion called Lefi Mida Mishale, which is a sugya Masechet Psachim. Lefi Mida means he just had to replace the exact volume of what he ate of the truma that belonged to the Kohen. But if you hold Lefi Damim Mishan, that he has to actually compensate the Kohen, it's a little bit strange, although I forgive him in terms of criminal guilt, he's a shogeg, but nevertheless, he still has to pay back to the Kohen something that's commensurate to the value of what he ate from the Kohen, and he's giving the Kohen chulin tmeim instead of truma tmeya, truma Torah. But the answer to this question apparently is the following: that although it's true that truma tmeya is not valuable to the Kohen, but nevertheless here he's giving him chulin tmeim. Now chulin tmeim can be eaten b'tumah, as we saw earlier. Whereas, so now we're comparing the following: what the Kohen lost was truma tahora, and what he got back was chulin tmeim. And apparently chulin tmeim, even if you hold fi damim b'shalom, is equal in value to truma tmeim, maybe even beyond that. As we saw before, the Kohen benefits from it. All right, that was all in the case of shogeg. Now we get to the case of b'mezid. He deliberately gave the Kohen chulin tmeim. Ein tashlumav tashlumin. Nothing happened over here. The chulin remained chulin. And they're going to go back to the person who ate the truma of the Kohen. And there's no chal hashem truma on that which he gave the Kohen. He'll get it back, and now he has to replace it by paying with chulin tahorim. V'chachamim omrim bein b'shogeg, bein b'mezid, tashlu of tashlumin, v'chozer mishalim chulin tahorim. So even in the case of shogeg, we're going to require of him to replace the truma tmeya with chulin tahorim, and we're going to assume that there's a chal hashem truma on the payros. They belong to the Kohen. That which he was mafresh. That which he gave to the Kohen. Now, for a moment here, let's go back to the shita of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says that in the case of mezid, ein tashlum of tashlumin. Chachamim say tashlum of tashlumin. But if according to the Torah law, the tashlumin is tashlumin, and yet Rabbi Meir in the Brisa is quoted as saying, "Ein tashlum of tashlum," which means that there's no chalosh shem truma on the peiros. Then you're taking away that which belongs to the Kohen according to the Torah law. So the Gemara is medayik. But let's analyze the shita of Sumchus in the name of Rabbi Meir. You got to admit that on a deraisa level, even if the chulin were tmeim, he could be mafresh them as truma, and the Torah recognizes and validates that hafrashas truma. And this is based on Rabbi Eloi, back on the Peites Amid days, that chulin tmeim are reuyim lios kodesh. And we derived it from Ra al Hayofen. That's when we discussed the question of the Ovid Mahani, Ovid Lo Mahani. In any event, we see clearly that chulin tmeim can become truma. So on a deraisa level, it's truma ma'aliyah, which means it belongs to the Kohen. So if b'mezid, the thief, we'll call him, pays his tashlumin with peiros tmeim, meaning chulin tmeim, on a deraisa level, once he pays the Kohen now acquires ownership of it. And now we're going to say that ain't tashlum of tashlum in the case of mezid, and on a deraisa level, the mekadesh bu Kohen isha tofsebe kedusha. He can mekadesh with his own mama, because tashlum of tashlumin on a deraisa level, it's mineral yof, minatovi al tor. It's omer rabbanan. Now the rabbanan is saying, according to Rabbi Meir, ain tashlum of tashlumin. The payers do not belong to the Kohen, and if he had used those payers to mekadesh and isha, the kedushin is invalid. The rabbanan are taking kedushay Torah and completely invalidating that which is a valid kedusha makes it into an eich. Now it's saying no, she can marry anyone she wants because it wasn't his moment and he never was mekadesh her because ain't tashlum of tashlumin. So the Gemara now reinterprets Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir never meant to say ain't tashlum legamre, but rather my ain't tashlum legamre Rabbi Meir. He's got to replace this payment with another payment and make sure he gets it right on the second round, and he gives to the Kohen Chulin Tahorin. But certainly, Rabbi Meir would agree that if the Kohen took the Chulin Tmeim that he received as payment and he was Mekadesh and each of the Kedusha would be valid. We're not going to undermine the Kedusha. So the Gemara immediately asks, Hachi Sumchas Hainu Rabbanon. Right? Sumchas, the name of Rabbi Meir, is exactly like the Rabbanon. Where is there a machlokas? Because even the Rabbanon who rejected Sumchas in the name of Rabbi Meir, they hold that Tashlum of Tashlumin, V'chayev l'shalem shuv shenis, which is exactly what Sumchas is saying now in this new interpretation in the name of Rabbi Meir. The machlokas here is about shogeg. Sumchus now becomes the mekil. In the name of Rabbi Meir, he's saying only if the payment was done with eros chulin b'mezid. Chulin tmeim b'mezid. Then the Rabbanan instituted a knas, and he has to pay a second time with peros chulin tahorim. But not in the case of shogeg. Shogeg, everything remains status quo. Whereas the Chacham hold that whether or not he made this payment with shogeg, not knowing that they were chulin tmeim, or he was mishalim b'mezid, knowing full well that he was violating the law and paying with chulin tmeim, in both cases, according to Chachamim, they instituted a knas and required of him to pay a second round of eretz chulin tahorim to replace that what he gave tmeim. So that you see clearly that according to the Rabbanon, even in case of Shogig, where in principle he doesn't deserve a knas, we're going to impose a knas on him, or to mazit. If we let him get off the hook in the case of Shogig, he might extend it to mazit. But as it turns out, Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim, in the case of Mazit at least, are saying the same thing, that the Tashlumin is Tashlumin, but he has to replace the payment with Chulin Tahorin. And we cannot undermine the Tashlumin themselves, because then you're going to be Mater and Eishasi Shlial. And that's not within the purview of Koach Chacham. Toshma, another case where we see the Chacham are Okir Dov Min Torah. Dam, so we have Dam of Korban that's Omid L'Zrika, so it's after Kabbalah Sadam. And Nitma, now it became Tomei. So Dam is Tomei, we cannot fulfill the mitzvah of Zrikas Hadam with Dam Tomei on the Mizbeach. Uzrako, and the Kohen nevertheless went ahead and he took Dam Tomei and he sprinkled it on the Mizbeach. B'shogeg. Now, shogeg here means one of two things. Either he was zorek dam tameh b'shogeg, meaning he didn't know that it was tameh. It looked identical to dam tar. Or alternatively, it means the tumah of the dam was conveyed b'shogeg. Hurtza. Hurtza is another word, a synonymous word to kapara. There's a mechaper, which means that the Bailam fulfilled their obligation. They don't have to replace this karba with the second karba, even though the zrika was a zrika of dam tameh. But b'mezid, now he deliberately did the zrika of dam tameh, or the tum itself that was contracted by the dam was b'mezid. And now, in the case of that zrika, lo hurtz. So there's no kaparas habaylim, and the baylim will have to replace this carbon with another. We're going to prove from the tzitz that b'diavad dam tome is maratza, it's mechaper, and the carbon is ol shem chova. So that's on a deraisa level. And now you're going to tell me that because the mazid he was zorik the dam, therefore the carbon is not mechaper, and we have to replace it with another carbon. On a deraisa level, he was already yotze with the first carbon. Tisanya, we learned in the Bryce Halmat Tzitz Maratza, al Adam, Viala Bosa, Viala Chalef, Shenitma, Bain Bishogig, Bain Bemazid, Bain Bonus, Bain Birotzim, Bain Biochid, Bain Sibur. Means you don't have to replace it with another carbon because of the ritzit sits. And that's a doraisa halacha that sits is maratz al carbon, even if the dam that was sprinkled on the mizbeach this week was tameh, and the carbon is kosher. And nevertheless, who v'amri rabbana lo hurtza, the rabbana can say that since the Kohen was guilty of a mazid in his rika, therefore there's no ritzit carbon. Now he's going to bring a carbon to replace the first, when according to the Torah law, he was yotze with the first. Then what's going to happen is he is bringing chulin lazar, because the Torah has determined that he was already yotze, there was already kaparas bailam from the first carbon. And now the second carbon, which he's not obligated in, is by definition chulin, and he's bringing chulin into the azara. So you see clearly that Rabbanan could be okir dovim min Torah. And by the way, we discussed yesterday, which is going to come up very soon, the distinction between Shevi Altas and Kumvaseh. This is a case of Kumvaseh. He's going to bring the carbon into the Azora, and it's chulin. What did the Bryce mean when it said lo hurtza? It meant lahatir basa b'achila. There are two there are two different, how do you say, poliotin? There's two different repercussions or results of Zrikas Adam. One is that Zrikas Adam clinches the mechaper, the kapar, the reach of the carbon. And number two, it's mate the basar b'achila. Again, usually in most cases, achila means achilas kohen, with the exception of shlomim, where there's both achilas kohen and achilas payla. But in any event, the basar is only mutar b'achila after zrika. I will buy them in its kapar, but the Bryson never meant to say that the entire entity of the carbon is completely null and void. He doesn't have to bring another carbon. It says lo hurtza. Lo hurtza means that he has a problem with achilas habasar. And at this point, you might ask, well, if there's no achilas habasar, can it be yotze the carbon? But the answer is that the basar is not makiv the carbon. Even though the Gemara says in many places that kohanim ochlim ubailim miskaprim, it doesn't mean bailim miskaprim in terms of the very efficacy of the carbon, or whether it's whether it's reaching carbon. No, that's not what it means. Bailim mechaprim means that there's an extra kapara through the achilas hakohen. But even if the basar gets lost, it becomes tameh. In all those cases, he doesn't have to bring another carbon to replace the first. In fact, the Gemara, but sof comes akra achilas basar, and the Torah says ksiv v'achlu osam. This is in Shmos Chavtes v'achlu osam asher chupar b'hem malamich hakohanim ochlu b'olim eskaper. So we see from this price that the Chacham were oker a mitzvah asay of achilas kohanim esabasa. And here's where we finally get to the fundamental distinction that we've been talking about. This is the moment we've been anticipating, and let him come out front stage. We'll give him an applause with a 7-piece band. The famous distinction between kum v'aseh and shevi al taseh. Amalei Rabbi said to Rav Chizda, shevi al taseh shiny. When the Chachamim say don't violate in an active way the Torah, but passively to not fulfill the Torah's law, that's called shevi al taseh. That's within the purview of the Chachamim, and nobody denies that. The issue is going to be kum v'aseh, because we'll see later on that Eliyahu Navi Bar Carmel was oker dovim in Torah b'kum v'aseh, but that might be because he's a Navi, and then we have to see if the Chachamim have the same status as a Navi, and they could be oker dovim in Torah b'kum v'aseh. And then we're going to finally come to the final conclusion. I'm giving you a heads up, previews of coming attractions, which is called Migdar Milsa Shayne. But right now, the Gemara is holding that the Rabbanan are fully authorized to tell us to be passive and not fulfill a mitzvah which the Torah requires us to fulfill. Because in such a case, the Akiras Din Torah is Nasa Memela. It's not the Chacham are telling you to violate the Torah actively. So therefore, in this case of a Kohen who is Zorik the Dam b'mezid b'tuma, enochinami. The Kohen, the Bala Korban was Yotze. But the Kohanim are enjoined from eating the basar. It's almost as if, when you want to give a full-fledged geshpanka to a carbon and give it all the checks, this is a perfect carbon, and the Balaams, the Kohanim are sitting down to the meal and they are eating the basar. Yeah, that's the ultimate celebration of the carbon. And we're not going to allow this celebration because this Kohen deliberately was zorek dam tameh. But the carbon itself is kosher. Now, with regard to tashlumei truma, if the Chacham would say that tashlumei truma are not tashlumin, then that would be a bittul b'kum v'aseh, because now the Rabbanan are being mafkia from the payrolls to the din of Truma, and they're saying it doesn't belong to the Kohanim. And if he would be Mekadesh and Isha, she will not be Mekudeshes. That's already Hkoch Yad Chacham Laker Dominator Bekuva Set. And the Gemara now goes on into a tiyul, an entire excursion through Shas, to show that there are many, many cases in different areas of halacha where the Chacham are being Oker Doven Torah, and Rav Chizda never even bothered to mention all these myriads of cases because it was always Shevi Altas.